Welcome to the Alloutcoach podcast. My name is Tim Mikhelishvili, and I'm your host. Podcasts are one of the best ways to educate ourselves, to share skills, and to also join a learning and development community, which is how I look at my own podcast as well. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Joel Topf. He is the medical director of St. Clair Research, also a partner at St. Clair Specialty. He's a nephrologist and a true pioneer in using social media for medical education. He has been running his blog, Precious Bodily Fluids, for 12 years. He co-created the longest running Twitter journal club, NephJC Journal Club, which I heard about after doing a literature review on social media delivered medical education. And I was fascinated by its success. And I had a chance to meet him just a few months ago. NephJC connects nephrologists all around the world to discuss scientific papers twice a month. He has a large Twitter following and is a regular guest on the Internal Medicine podcast that's very popular that all of you may have heard of, the Curbsiders. He was awarded the Robert Narens Award for Innovation in Medical Education by the American Society of Nephrology and has given talks on the use of social media in medical education in 8 countries around the world. He makes visual abstracts for 6 different medical journals and organizations. And today he's going to talk about medical education via social media. Joel, what a pleasure to have you here, share your ideas and the journey that you have been through and now are taking all of us through as well.
Welcome. This is great. I really appreciate the invitation. Thanks for having me on.
So how did this journal club that has really taken on a different image of its own really start? Can you give us the background?
Yeah. So the first medical journal club on Twitter that I saw was called MedJC, or Medical Journal Club. And it was started by a junior doctor and a medical student in England. And they kind of figured it out and they kind of cracked the code. And they had their own website and they did a little summary of the article. And then they invited people to join a discussion. And the discussion happened in real time for 1 hour. And I joined in for a couple of their articles that were relevant to nephrology, but it was a general medicine journal club, and they would have articles on cardiology and oncology and all different fields. But like a lot of these Twitter journal clubs, after maybe a year or two, they petered out and they've disappeared from the internet and they're gone now. But it struck me as it was a really good idea and they executed it well. And then in 2014, one of the people that I was kind of tangentially working with on Twitter, and we were tweeting back and forth, said we should start a nephrology Twitter journal club. And I was like, I think it's a good idea, but I really wanted a dedicated partner to do this with me, that I knew it was going to be a lot of work and I didn't want to do it alone. So I said, hey, why don't you do this, this, and this, kind of just giving him a bunch of tasks to see if he would do it. This guy's name is Swapno Hiremath. And God darn it, he did it. He knocked off everything I asked him to do. And I was like, okay, this is the partner for me. And we joined forces. And in, I think it was April of 2014, we did our first journal club. And one of the early questions that we had was like, how often are we going to do these? And I think the easy answer is once a month. And I was like, no, we want to do this twice a month. We want to make sure, right, there's enough literature out there that if we do it once a month, we're going to really have to just be very, very selective and not be able to be experimental with what we choose. And I wanted to have a lot more latitude. So let's double that. Let's do it twice a month. And we've kept up that pace since then. And it has been exhausting at times because, what we do for a journal club, and I'm not sure how familiar your audience is with a journal club. So can we just start with a description of what a medical journal club is? This was something that was invented by the grandfather of medical education, William Osler. He couldn't afford subscriptions to all the journals he wanted. And so he would find somebody who had a subscription to a journal. They would pick an article and a bunch of people would get together and share the article and discuss it. And then he took this to Johns Hopkins when he went there, and everybody kind of loved it because it's difficult if you're not, you can read a single journal article alone, but if you don't know the context in which that experiment or that manuscript exists, you can't really understand it. You really need to know what went on beforehand. You can think about if you were describing a problem, if you had like a long story about a problem, each paragraph would be a different manuscript, a different piece of evidence, and you string them all together. Now you got a picture of the story. But when you're reading one manuscript, all you have is that one paragraph, and you need other people, or at least a lot of expertise, to understand the full context. And that's what you get with a journal club.
Mm-hmm.
And this has become a staple of medicine. Like 85% of internal medicine residencies have a journal club. And it's a great time. One of the new philosophies in education, I don't know how new it is, but one of the bigger philosophies in education is called flipping the classroom, in which you allow the students to become the teachers. That's what it means by flipping the classroom. And it also means that a lot of the busy work that we used to do in class, basic studying, you do at home on your own, and you reserve the class for what the class is really good at, which is discussion and collaboration. And that's what happens in a journal club, is that everybody reads the article at home and then they meet together for the discussion. So it's a great example of the flipped classroom. It has a great place in medical education. And people love it. People really like it because it's a great way to stay up to date on the literature, which is one of the constant goals and struggles of all doctors. But as soon as you leave the academy, right, as soon as you finish your residency and finish your formal training, you'll lose the journal club. And a lot of people have, aspirations. Oh, in my private practice, I'll set up a journal club and we'll just do it with our partners. And it just never gets done because it's just a lot of work. It's the kind of thing that, there's always other demands on your time. And so this Twitter journal club was just an opportunity to let's bring the journal club out of the academy and bring it for everybody. And one of the things that we did some research on who was going to these journal clubs, I wasn't so surprised, but I was fulfilled to see that the average age was not the 25-year-old in residency. It's not the 32-year-old in fellowship. It's the 40-year-old who's out in private practice, or they've left the academy, but they're still dedicated to nephrology. They're still dedicated to their medical education, and now they found a venue where they can get back to a journal club that they couldn't get to before. And that was very gratifying because that's what that's what I felt. This is what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so it's been real successful there. And one of the things, the high point of the journal club is the 1 hour discussion. It's a live discussion. There's a leader who kind of walks through the article in a very structured way, usually about 60 tweets and there's a lot of questions where he's inviting people to participate, and then everybody's answering questions, and there's a bunch of side discussions that go off. It's when you look at it, when you take a step back and you look at it, it looks like total chaos. But if you're actually listening to it and you're following along, you can follow it fine. But there are a lot of different threads. There's a lot of different cross conversations that go on simultaneously, and I think newcomers can be pretty intimidated, but it works. So, but that's the centerpiece of NephJC. But we have a lot of stuff around that support it. So one of the things we have is a summary of the article, right? Because not everybody has time to read a full manuscript. Here, what we have is usually 2,000 words. 4 or 5 pages where you could read, I get a sense of, and that'll include the background and go through the previous literature. It'll go through the methods and the results, and also kind of the conclusions and the implications of the study. And then we'll also do a visual abstract, which is kind of a 1-panel comic book that kind of describes the whole study.
Yep.
And then, and it'll also have we'll also have a Tweetorial, and which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, which will kind of summarize what went on in the discussion. And then lastly, we'll do a podcast in support of it. So once we kind of pick an article, we do a lot of stuff around that to kind of deliver that article to the community. And not everybody does everything, right? Some people are like, I forgot. And we also have a newsletter. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out that also does this. And so there's a lot of ways to get the medical information that we digest and go through and summarize. You can do it by podcast, you can do it by tweet chat, you can just do it by traditional literature, just kind of read the summary or read the article itself.
The people that really inspired me to start this podcast, Alloutcoach, were a mentee that I had, and also a physician that I heard talk about the podcast in which he was summarizing the key learnings and abstracts and sessions from a conference that everyone else in the room in that regional conference that I attended was referencing. And I told myself, look, this may be a good idea, to start a podcast. And, so I actually, my inspiration came from a physician. My question is, how do physicians, the busy physicians, focus on a different format of education and find it valuable too, as has been the case clearly with your journal club?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're seeing a lot of everybody's attention shifting to social media, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're looking at physicians or teenagers or teachers. Everybody, this social media is exploding in importance. It's taking up more and more hours of our day and more of our attention. And so, just like when YouTube exploded, it was not just one type of content that was on YouTube. There was educational content, there was entertainment content, there was music content, all of it was there. And same thing with social media. There's all kinds of content in social media, including medical education. And so it's just, we're just taking that same kind of attention that used to be devoted to medical education outside of social media, and we're finding a way for people to do it with social media, because there's lots of aspects of social media that people like. Right? And one of them is kind of there's a conversational tone, right? Like I personally, when I find it very, very frustrating to listen to a lecture and not be able to push back on what I think is a intellectual sloppiness or looseness with the facts. That gets me very upset, and I want to call somebody out on that. And on social media, you can do that immediately. Right? You can quote tweet their tweet, or you can reply to their tweet, say, hey, I think you were a little loose in the way you did this. And how about this article that points the other direction on that? And you can engage them in a conversation in a way that you can't do in traditional media, where you're supposed to sit there and listen to me, and you don't really have a mechanism for two-way communication. And I find that to be frustrating. I kind of find it to be treating me like a child, right? I'm an adult learner, and if you want to engage me, you need to engage me. You can't just talk at me. And that's one of the things that social media provides.
Right. Yeah. What really resonated with me was learning and teaching, because I always say that it's the best way to learn is to teach something you just have learned. And basically, that's what I've been doing the last 3 years, where I've been going on video on Mondays, on Fridays, trying to inspire my colleagues or share with them for the week or the weekend ahead. I have a newsletter also, on LinkedIn. And so I think that's one of the best ways to learn. And that's how I look at podcasts. And physicians, I mean, they use social media for various reasons. Some of them to promote, of course, their research, but others to train, to manage crisis, right? How has it changed during the pandemic?
Yeah, the pandemic was really crazy time for social media. I keep going back to March of 2020 when this thing started, and everybody, the whole world kind of shut down.
Right.
I remember, was it March 13th when the NBA said we're canceling the rest of the season?
Yeah.
It's like the cancel. I couldn't believe it, right? Just kind of boggled my mind that it was just over. And and I remember that happened before, like, the U.S. government shut down schools and everything, and it was just like, wow. And to me, it did feel like the NBA was kind of leading the world rather than when you think it'd be the other way around. And at that moment, there was this intense interest in this topic, and there was lots of speculation and lots of wild ideas, and not great places to get that information, right? And tremendous demand. And a lot of that demand ended up being filled on social media. And one of the things that our NephJC community did, we had already been in existence for 6 years. We had established really good networks of scientists from around the world, with people that we've been working with who joined our journal clubs over time. And there was a question, there was actually a number of questions, but the first one that came up was that the SARS-CoV-2 binds something called ACE2 to cause an infection. And ACE2 is a molecule that may or may not be affected by a common blood pressure medication called an ACE inhibitor, an angiotensin receptor blocker. And there was some animal data that showed that it would upregulate ACE2. And you started to think, oh my gosh, having more ACE2 may make patients much more susceptible to COVID. And then you start thinking, oh yeah, hypertension is one of those comorbidities that they've identified as causing severe COVID. Maybe the reason that hypertension causes severe COVID is because hypertensive patients are on ACE inhibitors, and that was the issue. And you could see that jump of logic, and a lot of people took it, and people started talking in major newspapers, the New York Times, maybe you should be taking your ACE inhibitor in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And, these are life-saving drugs, and we should not be willy-nilly telling people to stop taking them. And so this was right in our wheelhouse. It was a question that was right up our alley. And we just started going through all of the literature. We started creating an annotated bibliography of all the literature on ACE2 and ACE inhibitors and hypertension and COVID, and whether there was any relationship and whether you should be concerned about it. And we were summarizing medical guidelines that were commenting on this. It started with two of the founders of NephJC, Matt Sparks and Swapnil Hiremath, but they quickly got overwhelmed. There was a lot of information that was coming out about this, a lot of research that was emerging quickly. And so they quickly, on the fly, built evidence review teams of this network of people that they knew. They'd already built this interconnected network, and they coordinated their work on Twitter and we built all kinds of siloed web pages, all about COVID and dialysis, COVID and transplant, COVID and hypertension, with all the information, all the latest literature on there summarized. And it became a pretty incredible resource for the community that at a time when they had lots of questions. We did podcasts on this. We bring in experts to talk about this and kind of reinforce this type of information. And our website kind of transformed into a COVID information center for nephrologists, for kidney specialists. I'm actually getting over COVID myself right now. So it was a pretty amazing thing. And our website traffic just went off the scale. We're usually about 30,000 visits a month. We were all of a sudden 300,000 visits a month. It just was incredible, the demand for this information, and we were the source for that.
Right.
And in fact, this ended up spurring, one of the authors of this page did a randomized controlled trial, which is really the answer you're looking for to see if this thing really affects it. And there ended up being no effect of the ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers on COVID infections. Thank God.
I mean, the growth has just been incredible, of your journal club. But for those who are not familiar with nephrology or with NephJC Journal Club, let's spend some time maybe contrasting the Twitter as a platform versus others. Because I'll be honest with you, I'm not a specialist in Twitter, and I know you have actually a social media training internship that you have started on Twitter. So what are some of the success factors in starting a journal club or a community on Twitter?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see why Twitter is different from other social media products, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
it's very popular among physicians, right? It's the most popular.
And among scientists and among journalists, and it's very much among knowledge workers. It's very popular, and you can start to link. So one, Facebook, you create a Facebook page. But when you publish to that page, people that like that page don't necessarily get those updates pushed to their news feed, right? And in fact, Facebook then tries to sell you access to people that have already liked your content, which is, to me, pretty scammy, right? If they, these people kind of already made the commitment to my site, why don't you push up my information to them? Mm-hmm. But that's their business model, and they make a ton of money, right?
Yeah.
So Twitter's not like that, right? Everybody who follows you will see what you post, which is big deal. That's one of the differences. And that's one of the reasons that I don't think Facebook has been able to get a lot of traction as a source of this type of information. Instagram, another Facebook product or Meta product, they are very limited in the type of content you can post, right? You can put a picture and you can put as much words underneath that picture that you want, but you can't put a link. And a link is super important when you're doing medical education, right? So you can say, hey, I believe this. And then most importantly, I believe this because link to primary literature, link to YouTube video, link to presentation that I gave, an hour-long presentation that I gave on this topic, right? Right. You can link to just about anything. And that allows you can't just say anything. And if you just say something and you don't provide the data, people will call you out on it, right? They're like, why would you say that? Well, you need to show me the data. And there's no way to show me the data on Instagram except for link in bio, which means that you can only kind of promote one thing at a time. It's just very, very limiting. And it seems like it's a weird artificial limit. Right. Instagram doesn't want you leaving Instagram, so they don't allow you to put links in. It drives me bananas. And then the other thing about Twitter that I think is super important is the ability to amplify things that you like, the ability to retweet. And so, that's a lot of what makes Twitter valuable is the social proof, right? Somebody that you trust has promoted this other tweet so that you see it. That adds validity to what that tweet says. Yeah. Right. Oh, Topf promoted that. He usually knows what he's talking about. Right. So, and that social proof is super important, right? The question is always, well, how do you know what you can trust? And there's always a question of that, right? You can't trust anything blindly, but when lots of people that you trust, that you know are good doctors, that you've seen their stuff before and it's good stuff before, and they've helped you out in situations before, when multiple of them are promoting something and retweeting it, and you're seeing it coming up in your timeline through them, that adds to how much you trust them.
What I find fascinating also is how you've created a real community, a true community. And I was a witness of that. I saw that firsthand when we first met. You've been able to take that virtual community, generate a long-standing relationship and a learning and development community, which everyone is hungry for. And I saw just a large group of physicians, incredible physicians, panelists, moderators at that event where we first met in Boston. A lot of those virtual training and medical education translates into skills, into even skills that may be in emergency room for emergency medicine physicians who I know are using podcasts, for example, or even training for surgical procedures and learning models via WhatsApp and various different types of real-time communication on medical skills. Was there a turning point where a turning point at some stage of NephJC Journal Club where you felt like that's what really created that community? Was there a one particular journal club?
It's really been a slow burn. Over a long time, there's no one time that we exploded.
Okay.
One of the important components is that a year into doing the journal club, Swapnil and I are going, we need to have a better model. We need to find some other people to help us because this is a lot of work. And I said, what we need is an intern. And so we designed an internship where we'd train people in social media medical education and see how that would work. And so we started this social media internship, and that is 1 year younger than NephJC. So that's 7 years old now. And we started with 4 people. And we grew it over time. We peaked at 50 and we're like, no, that's too big. We got to dial it back. And now we're at about 35 people a year. We get these interns from all over the world. And we train them in writing blog posts, running tweet chats like NephJC, doing visual communications like visual abstracts. And now we teach them how to do podcasts. So those are the 4 pillars of it. We have a bunch of different projects that they do. And it's an internship, not a class. Like they don't just sit there. It's not passive. It's all active. They're doing, because that's how we think that you learn. And it's a very supportive community. And we have a private Slack, which is an important tool that we use where we're able to show, hey, this is a good example of using social media. This is a bad example of using social media. Don't do this, do this, that type of thing, which is a really powerful way of teaching and communicating values. And you do this for 7 years and you do 30 people a year, you start to get a lot of community, a large population of people that have done it. And one of the things that are graduates have gone out to do is they don't disappear after they leave. They stay on as faculty. They start projects of their own. A lot of high profile projects in nephrology were started by our graduates. One of the spinoffs of the Curbsiders is a pediatric podcast called the Cribsiders. Well, Brett was one of our, or Burke, Dr. Burke was one of our graduates. So you see these spinoffs all over the place have been really powerful in terms of building out the community of people that generate content for Neph Twitter and generating the community of people that are part of our community, which is great, and making it more vibrant. There's another website called NephPocus, which is a point of care ultrasound site for nephrologists. Really excellent site. Another one of our graduates. NephSim, a website that gives questions and tips and training modules for nephrologists. Excellent stuff. Another one of our graduates. So time after time, we're training the people to build the next level of content. And that's how you build a community. It's been really successful. And, and one of the other things that it's done is we have this, our faculty is larger than the number of interns. And it's been successful at what I initially wanted to do, which was like, I need to spend less hours a week doing NephJC, and the interns take care of it. Now we've got that system running. It's really, really successful.
Yes. So you mentioned the system. Let's talk about the system in more detail and differentiate the website that you have that gets 30,000 visits and the Tweetorials that you do. How does it really all work? How do you put a journal club together?
Yeah, I can totally do that. So a lot of journal clubs, they just pick a topic. They pick a topic and they do they have a time, and everybody comes for that 1 hour and they discuss the journal club, the article, and it's great, but then it's gone. And one of the things about Twitter is it's very ephemeral. Sorry
to interrupt. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So when you say they come in for an hour, do they come in person, or do you mean they log in at the same time?
They log onto Twitter. They log onto Twitter, and
okay.
The way these journal clubs are always organized, they're organized by a hashtag, right? Mm-hmm. And what you do is you search for that hashtag, and you don't look for the most popular tweet, you look for the most recent tweet. And these hashtags are not like trending hashtags on Twitter. They're not that popular. They're just the 16 or 20 or 50 or 100 people discussing this journal club, and you follow this hashtag. And that's how you can participate in the journal club, and that's how you participate in discussions, by following this hashtag. And our hashtag is always the same. It's NephJC, hashtag NephJC. But during that hour, you can follow that, and that's a great way to do that. But oftentimes I'll be like, man, we covered this in NephJC a couple of years ago, but I can't quite remember what the conclusions of the article is. That's what the website's for. The website is an archive of the experience, right? So we have the summary there and the visual abstract and the link to the podcast. All of that is on the website. You can go back and you can tweak Twitter's search settings to be able to come up with that, but it's just it's a hack.
Difficult.
It's a hack.
Yeah, that's the difficult. Yeah, that's what I found challenging, and I'm really glad you just brought that up.
And I really think that the Twitter Journal Club, that's a live event, and that really, you have to be there for that hour, and and once it's gone, it's gone. But the other things, like the Tweetorial, like the summary, like the visual abstract, like the podcast, those are timeless. And that's what's all organized on the website.
Okay, so the Tweetorial, can you go into a little more detail on the Tweetorial as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the problem with a tweet always is, it's only 240 characters. What could you teach in 240 characters?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what they do is you take one tweet and then you reply to that same tweet. Now you got 240 characters, and then you had to add another one that's another 240 characters. And we try to chain about 10 of them in. Well, that's 2,400 characters. Now you got something, you can really say something. And Jamie Willows is the guy who does our Tweetorials for us. And he kind of came up with his ideas. I'm going to do a 10 tweet recap where he chains 10 tweets together and summarizes kind of the whole experience of the Tweetorial, of the tweet chat. And it's self-contained, it's easy to read, it's a great little summary. And you could do the same thing on a blog post, but keeping it all on Twitter makes it much more viral, and they get much more reads. And, there's some people that really focus on just doing tutorials as their kind of full educational package that they're going to be delivering to medical education. And they do wonderful jobs, and they get tremendous uptake and a readership. It's phenomenal. And, the fact that they can be easily spread and retweeted on Twitter is really powerful. And so so that's part of our educational package with every week's NephJC.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a collection of tweets and a summary of tweets that ends up being a very effective way to teach. Right. So what are some of the most effective ways that you found to educate? Effective formats? Are videos, for example, do you use videos on Twitter at all? Can you go live on Twitter?
So there's things that you can do, and there's things that I do. I have not gotten into video. It's not my thing.
Okay.
I love doing podcasts. I think they're really, really intimate, and the voice is really much more powerful than text. Plus, you can consume them in areas where you normally couldn't consume content. I'm thinking about commuting and exercising and cleaning the house. It has a way when you're doing these other tasks that normally you might fill with music. Now you can fill them with educational content. And if that's your thing, if you like that, it's perfect. And it doesn't really compete with any other medical education. It's kind of a green field. It's a place that had never been exploited before. And it's been really fun to see that really develop. And people are using podcasts all over the place for that. It's really been an exciting change in medical education, and students and learners love it.
Yeah, Dr. Ian Lang in 1991 apparently said, teaching without testing is like cooking without tasting or reading without writing. And so how do you test the quality of the education at NephJC? What are some success stories you have?
All I can attest to is people keep coming back for more of it. People enjoy it. There was a survey done of nephrology fellows, asking nephrology fellows what resources they use to prepare for their board exams.
Yep.
Or to learn nephrology. These are people in the process of becoming nephrologists, and 35% of them said that they're using NephJC. It's becoming one of the major sources of medical education for fellows. And I really don't think we target fellows as our audience. We really target older and established nephrologists. So we're seeing people use it, and they're coming back for it, and they're marking it down as something that they find useful and compelling. And we have not gone out to try to measure educational effectiveness other than that.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that what you mentioned about the engagement, I learned about your journal club doing a literature review and doing a webinar on the social media education. And your journal club is an example and is a model that I think any specialty and not even medicine outside of the healthcare field, I think can use. Now, are there any tips you have in terms of how do you incorporate or consolidate many different parts of the process needed for the journal club in order to still be efficient with your time, productive? Are there any tips you have? How do you get everything done? The blog articles, this.
What you're looking at now is the kind of the fully functioning machine that's been developed over years.
Yeah,
and we didn't start out with this type of sophistication. Trust me.
Yep.
And we get this question a lot from other specialties. Hey, we want to start a journal club. That looks actually really compelling.
Right.
And we got that question so often. We went out and we wrote a white paper called Starting Your Own Medical Journal Club. And that's available on NephJC. You can just go there. You can get and it's like a 30-page discussion of how we do things.
It's nephjc.com, right? That's the website?
Yes, it's nephjc.com.
Okay, and then you have another blog, Precious Bodily Fluids.
Precious Bodily Fluids is my personal blog, and I've been doing that forever.
I see.
And quite honestly, a lot of what I used to do on Precious Bodily Fluid has just moved over to tweeting. Right? That's how I do most of my publishing now for social media, is not on a blog, but on Twitter. NephJC is not just mine, right? It's a whole community of people that do it, right? I'm a co-founder, and I'm on the board now because everything's gotten more complex as it's gotten bigger. But there's a lot of people involved there, and it's not my personal blog, but yeah, NephJC.com. And if you go to NephJC.com and you go to more, there is something called, the Twitter Journal Club Primer. It goes through a lot of our thoughts about what's important and, how to start and what are essential components and what are kind of optional to build on later.
Yep. So are there any new topics or channels that you're pursuing or you're exploring? Or do you feel like you have a system going now and it's working well and you're scaling the audience? What are the next steps now in the Neph Journal Club that we can expect?
Yeah. So for me, I'm moving on. Not moving on so much, but I am really focusing my energy on podcasts. I really think the podcasts are an important thing. So I do the NephJC as its own podcast, which is called Freely Filtered. And we try to get out an episode or two a month.
Uh-huh.
And then I also have a second podcast called Channel Your Enthusiasm, which is kind of a different type of podcast. Here, we're reading a nephrology textbook I have 8 nephrology educators of varying levels in their career, from beginners all the way through to professor emeritus. And we're reading one of the classic nephrology textbooks, and we're going through it chapter by chapter, and every chapter is about an hour and a half discussion. Mm-hmm. And it's a real fun, cool project. And I think these nephrology textbooks are just a kind of a bear to read alone, but it's kind of fun to read it as part of a group, to read a chapter and then listen to a bunch of experts kind of talk about what they learned and what they thought it was interesting and what has changed since that was published, that type of stuff. Yep. Put some context onto that. Yeah. And so that's what we're doing. And it's a real fun project. It's really successful.
Yeah, because it allows you to reinforce the knowledge and also share it. You test each other, and that makes sense because you need multiple time points and different audiences with whom to exchange that information. Like Benjamin Franklin said, right? Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. Right, so you're involving your peers, which is amazing, I think. And so
that's exactly right. It's an attempt to make reading a more active, or more importantly, a more communal experience. Hey, we're reading the book with you, right? Chapter by chapter. So this is the goal of Channel Your Enthusiasm. We're about a quarter of the way that I've published the podcast. We're about halfway through that we've read the podcast and recorded the chapters. I got a lot of backlog of editing to do.
I'll be remiss if I don't ask you about the ultimate audience, which has grown exponentially of medical education, and which doesn't end with our peer physicians, healthcare professionals, but also with patients themselves who are becoming ever more demanding. What message do you have for them who may not be as well trained as you are or your colleagues, in how they can systematically and critically go about analyzing the medical education that's now accessible so easily?
Yeah, no, that's wow. There is a lot of poor medical education out there. Right. On social media. And that is an area that I think there's a lot of pitfalls and charlatans that are promoting whatever they're promoting on social media. And I think it's an area that you need to be really careful. I would be incredibly hesitant to take any medical advice from anybody who was selling anything on the internet. And I think that anybody who's selling vitamins or supplements or anything, I think almost they're very suspect in terms of what that medical information is going to be. I think there's a lot of pitfalls and a lot of danger for patient level information. It's not an area that I've spent a lot of time doing. I've really focused on physician to physician education.
Yeah, and I think you're closing for that gap in education that actually increases with the increasing years in practice that's been published everywhere, right? The longer you spend in practice, the more education you actually need and the less quality of healthcare you provide. There's studies from Annals of Internal Medicine that, from 2006 that I still remember citing. And so you're, I think, helping educate those physicians who may be very comfortable with how they treat patients, but who may not be as up to date with the journal club. And I remember a journal club in the pharma industry and medical, where we identified a gap of this one hormone deficiency, which was described very well in pediatric patients, but we wanted to study it, whether or not it indeed existed in adults. And we turned around a study within 2 months. We authored a late-breaking abstract, which ultimately turned around the entire trajectory of the entire organization, and allowed many more patients to access the medication as well. So it all starts with, I think, critically translating literature in the form of a journal club and various different, reinforcements of that education. So I can't say enough, express my gratitude enough for just making this resource available to our peers, and also providing a model, and your enthusiasm, which clearly shows. So I'm really grateful for really redefining a new format of education that we all can benefit from via social media. Speaking of pharma, there are pharmaceutical companies like Eli Lilly and Pfizer who are now starting to do patient education and healthcare podcasts, but it's still a very gray area, for many pharmaceutical and medical device companies. And I know you have relationships, and you're an innovator and an independent thinker, and you speak with many pharmaceutical companies. How do you think modern progressive pharmaceutical companies should utilize social media and medical education via social media in order to reach patients as well as healthcare professionals?
Yeah, no, I think that's I think that that's a good question. I have some involvement. Nephrology has become recently a very exciting place after being a pretty sleepy specialty without a lot of innovation for a while. We now seem to be swimming in new drugs with new indications and important indications and life-saving medications. And we need to do a lot of outreach to patients. I mean, for the longest time, you have a patient who came into you with CKD, and you're like, well, we need to get your blood pressure fixed and be on an ACE inhibitor. And beyond that, there really wasn't a lot to do, and that's not the case now. And so I know we're starting to see some direct-to-consumer television ads, and that seems to be it's amazing how effective that is, right? I have patients coming in and asking, it's a classic, ask your doctor about this, and they're asking about, hey, is this drug right for me? I was like, as a matter of fact, it is. Right, you're right up that alley, and it's something that I wanted to talk to you about. And having the patient initiate it is just an amazing. It's so much easier to get them to accept the medication when they came in with that already on their mind. I'd never experienced that before in medicine, and it's even better when it's it's a product that I absolutely agree with, right? It's not a marginal situation. They're not asking to start a drug that they don't need. These are medications that really work and make a big difference for patients. And right now, the ones I'm thinking about are the SGLT2 inhibitors, and we're doing an abominable job, terrible job of getting these patients on these things. And so, that's to me, one of the missions. I mean, we have a possibility of really changing the natural history of chronic kidney disease with these medications, but not if they stay in the bottle. They need to be prescribed. And so, I'm just seeing this with direct-to-consumer television advertising, and I'm thinking to myself, the reality is that more and more attention is being directed to social media, and social media has, a lot of the same model as television. You can buy your way into people's news feeds, you can buy your way into people's Twitter feeds, and that seems to be a legitimate way to go to generate. And whether it's going to be just disease education, so people are more sophisticated about their understanding of chronic kidney disease, or awareness of, or whether it's specific, drug education, that this specific drug would be good for you. Personally, I think they're both going to be effective. I really do, right? Because I think patients feel that, boy, my doctor is not doing much for my CKD, and I'm worried about going on dialysis. I saw my aunt die on dialysis, and is there something I can do? And honestly, this excitement that we have in nephrology is going to extend. There's a lot of drugs in the pipeline. I think nephrology is going to be a pretty hot space in the coming decade.
Yep. Well, the studies are increasing. The volume of data and the velocity with which it's traveling is just going through the roof, I think. And your journal club, I think, allows us to accelerate our education, our hands-on training. And again, thank you very much, Joel. I'd like to leave you with a final word to just address those who may be dabbling and thinking about how to best utilize social media. And Dr. Ruth Gautian, who's the chief learning officer at Weill Cornell here in New York, and she was published in Nature, and she's interviewed many Nobel Prize laureates. She was actually a guest on this podcast, and she told me that one of the most common characteristics that these Nobel Prize laureates have, and these extreme high achievers, was that they had informal learning, a routine of informal learning that they worked out for themselves. And being part of the Neph Journal Club, I think, is that informal learning that you were mentioning earlier in the
I think that's a great way of putting it. Informal learning. I love it. Yeah, well, I think the NephJC meets twice a week. Go to our website, sign up for our newsletter. We'll announce every time that we're going to be doing one, so you'll know when to show up. We actually do two of them. We do one of them in the that's convenient for the Indian time zone, Indian subcontinent time zone, and one of them that's optimized for the United States, 9 p.m. on Tuesdays. Not every Tuesday, just 2 Tuesdays a month. And come and join one of the tweet chats and see what it's like. Kind of get a sense of what's going on. Because I think you'll find it compelling. You'll certainly find some other people to follow, people that have interesting takes, which is a lot of what you're trying to do, is trying to build a group of people that you follow on Twitter that are productive, that are not going to fill your timeline with a bunch of celebrity gossip or political stuff that's going to just make you angry. Yeah. Let's keep it focused on medicine, which is I think is important for making the platform productive.
Yeah.
And so it's as much about the discussion as about building the community. And you'll see that when you go there. It's a very welcoming community. And there are some spirited debates, but they never get nasty.
You're making learning fun, education fun, and also allowing people to explore, not to be an expert, but to be a constant explorer. Thank you. I'm going to join your social media internship program because I still need lots of tips on Twitter. I figured out
you're pretty good at this stuff, Tim. You're pretty good at this stuff.
Well, thank you. That's a compliment hearing from you, but I'm definitely going to join and learn from you. And I invite others as well to if you have space. I know you're a busy class, but I think
we only take 35, but we'll read your application. That sounds interesting to me. I thought we haven't had anybody from pharma yet. We had one application. They didn't make it. They didn't make the cut last year, but.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank you again for being a guest on Alloutcoach, Joel.
Take care.
Take care.